Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Nomkhosi Xulu-Gama, and this is book review week day 4. The book I'm reviewing today is this book. It's titled Hostels, Homes, Museum, Memorializing Migrant Labor Past in Lwandle, South Africa. The book was published in 2014 by UCT Press, and the authors are Noeleen and Leslie Witz. Okay, so this book, I bought it last year towards the end of the year, or mid-year actually. I bought the book last year, and I've only read it for the first time last year. But because these authors, they actually wrote an article which is similar to the concept of the book. So I have actually had read the book earlier on, not the book. I read the article earlier on. So it's only last year that I got to lay my hands on the book. Sorry. So I was very conflicted after reading this book. It got very kind of, I don't know, I received it in a very particular way. So I have not written, I only drafted what I'm going to read for you now for the purposes of the video, but I don't have any properly written review or any published review. I have not published a review from this book, like I just explained that I only read it last year. And I wasn't even thinking of actually writing a review. I'm only including it in these reviews because it's a book that I read not long ago, but also I find it very interesting, and I thought my views might be interesting around the issues that the book discusses. Okay, Hostels, Homes, Museum, Memorializing Migrant Labor Past in Lwandle, South Africa by Murray and Witz, 2014, UCT Press. Okay, so I'm just going to read the notes that I have drafted in preparation for this video, which reviews this book. This book, I quote, this book sought to reconfigure history as critical, engaged, and produced in multiplicity of sites and genres. In page 7. Roman figure 7. While the authors pride themselves for being involved in a project which has come to be known as the first township museum in Cape Town, I argue that this can be seen as a reputational lottery at the expense of the dispossessed, displaced, black working class, rural urban migrant workers. This book, for me, seems to be a perfect example of an academic project as imperialistic, based on subjects like history and geography, etc. The authors use their race and class privilege to control and manage the colonized, quoting Nyoga, or the precariat, quoting Standing. This book has 5 chapters, which in total are a documentation of the processes of making a museum from a hostel. It contains a photographic essay by Thulan Nxumalo, who is a graduate of the African program in Museum and Heritage Studies, and at some stage he was a collections manager in the museum, the Lwandle Museum. The book ends with a postscript and a conclusion by the authors, which revisits the title, arguing that there was actually no simple move from hostels to homes to museum, justifying the complex nature of the processes that took place as they tried to almost convert a hostel into a museum. Lwandle is a township which has a hostel. Both were established in 1958, which was a prime time for township and hostel development during apartheid, as regulated by the Group Areas Act of 1950, among other legislation. After 1994 democratic elections, as part of the government's redress processes and unsuccessful attempt at reversing the apartheid socio-spatial engineering, Lwandle Hostel became part of the hostel redevelopment program, supposedly turning it from hostels to home. This is what the government called the community residential units. In 1998, there was an initiative to have a museum of the hostel. A person or people by the name of Charmaine Plummer and Bongani Mgijima were primarily responsible for this initiative. Without their initiative, there would be no museum in Lwandle, writes the authors. This book tells us that Plummer lived in Somerset West in the foothills of Heidelberg Mountains. She is a former teacher who had helped establish the crèche in Lwandle, and Mgijima lived in the nearby, in what was called the native location of Lwandle, and was a history student at the University of Western Cape. This is where both the authors worked. Leslie Witz is a professor in the history department, and Noeleen Murray is an academic in the geography and environmental studies. The authors and co-founders, which is Plummer and Mgijima as the co-founders, the authors as Murray and Witz, of the museum, at some stage or another, they served as board members of the museum, together with many other individuals who are mentioned in the book. The museum that this book refers to is about memorializing the former single-sex workers' hostels and the lives of the people that lived in this space. The museum is in a hall-like space across the road from Lwandle Hostel. The people championing the establishment of the museum decided on using one block of the Lwandle Hostel, which is called Hostel 33 or Hostel Block 33. They made it an artifact of the museum. Since this decision did not emerge from the hostel dwellers, but those who can be understood as outsiders, based on the apartheid definition of who the hostel was meant for, that's how I'm calling them outsiders. This meant that the hostel dwellers had to be dislocated from Hostel 33 and dispossessed of their space in order for it to be used as an exhibition for tourists. The people who lived in this block had to be found new rooms in the hostel, and naturally some were displaced back to the rural areas. Those are the stories that are untold in this book. If you know anything about former single-sex migrant workers' hostels, you would know how resistant and insistent the hostel dwellers can be about change. The book which I'm reviewing tomorrow is exactly about that, the hostels in South Africa, Spaces of Perplexity. What the authors could not keep a secret was the fact that there were hostel dwellers who were totally against the idea of turning their hostel block into a museum. During the official opening of the museum on the 1st of May 2000, they even protested and they put up a placard which is written, "We are the residents of room 33, decide to write this note, disagree with you about this room to be a museum. Firstly, give us accommodation before you can get this room. Thank you from room 33. So this placard, the picture of the placard is shown in the book. But the processes continued as planned, regardless of that placard and that protest. This note depicts that the hostel dwellers were ready to negotiate and accept the move on condition that they were given better housing. However, research has shown that some hostel dwellers were against the so-called better housing, exactly because of the changes and the expectations that the community residential units assumed from the hostel dwellers. For that, you can see Xulu-Gama 2017. So my reflections and critique of this book is that 1. The Hostel 33 was never a home for single-sex workers or for single-sex black working-class rural urban migrant workers. It was a government institution which was established to accommodate and control black bodies or black male bodies. 2. It would never be a home for migrant workers because a home is where hostel dwellers originate from. A home is where one person's neighbor was buried when they were born, or a home is a place where people actually get buried when they die, regardless of how long they've been in the cities or regardless of who they reside with in the cities, whether it be their children and wives or children and partners. 3. Therefore, I argue that this is a misrepresentation to say that the hostel has moved from being a hostel to a home to a museum. What is clear is that this space has moved from hostel institutionalization, which was facilitated through black people's forced removals from their land, into museumization, as they call it, which has also meant that black migrant workers had to negotiate their removal from their temporary homes, which are the hostels. During the apartheid, it was the white government of the time who made decisions about where black people need to be located and determine their relations. In post-apartheid, we see the intellectually and the economically powerful deciding what should be done with the working class migrant workers' lives and spaces. The authors acknowledge the various sources of funding, with the biggest coming from the United States of America. The authors have a long list of people, black and white, who contributed to the success of the establishment of this museum. They also mention that they relied on different types of experts who had to be brought in to work on the different parts of perfecting the museum, particularly the extension of the Hostel Block 33. What becomes clear, although not written in black and white, is that it's not the black working class who financially benefited from this project, because the majority of the black working class, which are found in Lwandle, particularly in the hostel, they lacked the expertise needed to turn the hostel into a museum. The black people in hostels are mostly uneducated, or they have up to high school education. This does not disregard the fact that there are those who are now educated, or they are younger. There's a younger generation which is getting educated. They live in the hostels, or some of them were even born in from the hostels, or some leave the rural areas to come to the hostel so that they can be closer to the institutions of higher learning. But in this case particularly, this does not disregard the fact that Bongani Mkijimi is a co-founder, is black, and was actually in an institution of higher learning, which is UWC, as a history student when this project was initiated. Though he was not a hostel dweller, the book is clear that he actually lived in a nearby location, not in the hostel. I also recognize that when the museum was launched, one of the guest speakers was Sandile Dekeni, may he so rest in peace, who was a poet and had studied in various institutions of higher learning in South Africa. Although he no longer lived in Lwandle at that time, he used to be a hostel dweller, Lwandle hostel dweller. The reality of the matter is that the authors would not be able to find the experts from the black working class from Lwandle hostel, which they needed to create a fully functional museum. The authors wrote that what they were worried about was a couple of questions to follow. What kind of museum would it be? How would communities be reconstituted? Probably to fit or to suit the museum or the establishment of the museum. Was there sufficient funding to enable the museum to operate effectively? What role would the museum play in the deeply contested local and national politics? How would the museum be managed and curated? How would Hostel 33 be positioned? Should the tour be rerouted? Would visitors come? These questions are in page 161. So these are the kind of questions that the authors were rather worried about. There's not much about the people. The primary concerns are about the museum for the sake of the museum and the tourist. There's not adequate, if any at all, engagement with how the hostel dwellers are benefiting from this whole process of museumization, as they call it, other than those scholars and professionals who were involved in the conversion or the dispossession process. So yeah, that's the end of my written review. This is how I feel. And this is how I made sense of this book. So what happened is last year, the day that I bought the book is the day that I actually visited Lwandle Hostel for the first time when I was in Cape Town. It was a very emotional process for me to witness, if I may say. I first went into the museum, the one that is in a hall, and then they told us about Hostel 33, and then they escorted us, the people who worked there in the museum, they escorted us to the actual hostel where people were dispossessed. So we're able to see the placard that I read for you, which the book talks about. We're able to see it, and we're able to see how the hostel has been almost like redone to make it look authentic, so that it doesn't fall apart, so that it maintains whatever status that the creators of the museum wanted it to have. There's security system so that if people want, if there's a burglary, then the alarm can go off. It's kind of like nicely secured in that way. Obviously, then there's nobody living there because it's a museum now, or it's an extension of the museum, and people were, I say, dispossessed. Yeah, Norman, like we saw, I could almost feel the presence of the people who used to live there. There were also like a few pictures of the people. It really looked like a hostel in which people still live in, because that was exactly the point. The beds are still there. You'd find like maybe 2 beds in small, exactly how the hostels are, if you know the hostels, like 2 beds, sometimes 4 beds, like a whole different bedrooms. And yeah, with the furniture, the furniture was still there. And like, as the book details, that they had to buy some of the furniture to replace the old furniture so that it can live longer, but it still needed to have kind of the quality or the depiction of the kind of furniture that the hostel dwellers used to have. Let me not go on so much about it, but it was just a very emotionally disturbing structure to see, just kind of to see it as now a structure that people are supposed to be kind of be remembered for. It's for most people, hostels are not the history. It's not a past. It's not a forgotten. It's not in the memory. It's an everyday lived reality. And I'm not sure what are the benefits for the hostel dwellers in having that museum. Obviously, the worst part which I let on is the issue that people had to be dispossessed, as we heard from the stories of the people that we are conversing with, that some were displaced to the rural areas because of being in disagreement with the idea that the hostel was being made a museum. That was my take on it. So I will end the video. Thank you for watching, and thank you for engaging. See you in the next video. Bye.